Brought to you by Apostrophe. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Jouar, and today is Wednesday, September 20th, 2023, and I'm here with Steve Sistoli of Apostrophe. Did I do the mob thing right?
You did. It was perfect, Miriam.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you. It was perfect.
Thank you very much. Well, listen, Steve, before we dive in the news with the rest of our media guests this week, I wanted to have you on because I saw something kind of intriguing. And that's, you guys are working on an Android alternative that's more private and secure. Am I right?
Correct. So a couple of years ago, we decided to take on the duopoly that is Google and Apple. They've done a fantastic job over the decades, really indoctrinating people into
I like that word.
one way or another, right? You can either have what Apple is providing, both from an operating system as well as from a services point of view, and you could buy into that ecosystem, or you could take what Google's offering behind door number two.
Red pill or blue pill kind of thing.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. Fast forward now more than a decade, we need something different. We need something that is more centered around data privacy for an individual. And at the end of the day, it comes down to just providing another choice. The problem space, ultimately, that we find, though, is that there's already a lot of choice. There's eFoundation, there's Graphene OS, there's Calypso X.
Yeah, and some of these I'm familiar with. So, like, where do you think you fit in?
Exactly. So what we said is, look, the only way to take on what the duopoly has created, and really what they've created is this advertising model where we become the product. So that's the problem that's being solved for here. So the question is, what kind of technology and what type of business model now needs to come in to offer a legitimate alternative to those two, and something that could scale globally the way that both of those operating system companies have done it. And so what Apostrophe has done, and by the way, the AG at the end of this,
It's the Swiss and German
exactly,
limited co thing. Yes,
it
I'm
is.
aware.
And so what's interesting is, let's start there.
Okay.
Apostrophe AG, based in Lugano, Switzerland. And there's a
Yes.
reason that we're based in Switzerland.
Neutrality?
Neutrality. Very good. This is going to be much easier than we thought.
Told ya.
And so we started there. We said, look, if we're going to do this and we really want to focus on providing something that is private when it comes to data, we do need to go to a nation that understands the definition of data sovereignty. And that's where you kind of start the discussion. So that's step one. And you'd say, and many people have said, but that's not technical. We're not there yet, Steve. That's just a place. You've chosen to do things inside another country. Yes. True, but there's reasons we'll get to.
There's infrastructure, right?
Well,
Legal infrastructure, maybe?
Legal infrastructure. Let's talk about the technology now, because although the business is fun, and we'll talk about the business model in a little while, the technology is a lot more fun.
Right.
Number one, we needed to come up with really a replication of what Google provides.
Right.
Because Apple's already too difficult, right? It's a closed ecosystem, and there's not much we can do with it.
Well, there's really nothing you can do. They're not.
Right.
You don't have an open source base to start with. So
Right. And so immediately we turned to AOSP. And a few years ago, when we were doing our research on what are the really good alternatives or branches of AOSP that are focused around data privacy and security, we landed on Graphene OS. And there's a lot of reasons that we'll definitely get into in a
probably the
moment.
most successful alternative right now that has somehow managed to maintain some kind of presence.
They've done a really good job. The team continues to do an excellent job in terms of keeping up with the AOSP versions. But what's really important about what we saw Graphene do is they were never against something. They were for something. And it's a different conversation when you're actually for something versus against something. It makes all future conversations much easier. They were for data privacy,
Right.
which, by the way, happened to include removing a few components that Google put in.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about that because we don't have a huge amount of time. So I also want to talk about the business model a bit. What I'm curious about is, where, like, what did you add and remove? Because, we kind of, I think my audience knows what Android looks like. Like the challenge, of course, is a GMS, but without the privacy and security stuff. Because to a lot of us, those apps are critical. Like you wanted to use Uber on this phone.
Right.
That means you need GMS. So do you just say Uber is an unsafe, unsecure, unprivate app, and you kind of somehow compartmentalize that? Or do you say we have a way to kind of replicate GMS that doesn't have the security and privacy issues?
Can I take the long way around on the
Sure,
answer? Okay,
absolutely.
good. So we live by 4 tenets within the company, the 4 Ps: people, privacy, planet, productivity. And so when we speak about any elements of the end-to-end solution, we speak to one of those Ps. Privacy, I think, is the most obvious one, where Google has been removed in terms of its impact on privacy. So not all Google has been removed, just those elements.
No, I get it.
So let's talk about planet. Planet is actually quite important, especially from the demographic that we're going after. And so what we've done is we've added additional things to the operating system as well as the backend services that help people understand on a per application basis, what is your carbon footprint? And so then we put it into a very nice dial-up setting, we put nice graphs, and eventually people learn, well, my use of X is a bit much today.
Yeah,
My doom scrolling on TikTok is a bit much today, and it helps them learn on a per application basis. So the planet is actually quite important in terms of what has been added to the ecosystem. Finally, productivity. There was no way that we could be successful on a global basis without ensuring that we could still support the Google Play Store.
Right.
And so we think Graphene has done a really, really great job in being able to sandbox all of those elements.
Right.
So we've taken it to yet another degree.
Okay.
So that when you do get the phone and you turn it on, there's actually a GMS setup wizard. So out of the box, Apostrophe will have its own application store.
Of course.
It will have a concept that we call the Domos on the Piazza, or the home and the public screens.
Nice.
Anything that's on the home screen, you can be certain that it has been vetted for extreme data privacy as well as certain elements of security. And anything that goes onto the piazza, the public space, is questionable.
So who does the vetting?
So from anything that will go onto the Doma screen, or anything that will even go onto our store, our internal security experts manage all of that. The team today is comprised of about 50 professionals. They're located also in Switzerland. And so again, coming to that final P, the productivity, you can still download the Google Play Store.
Right.
But we do it with intention this time. We say, you're going to sign into Google. And it's no longer about being overseen by Google anymore. It's about your personal relationship with the applications that make sense to you.
Right.
Uber, etc.
So what does it look like from a notification point of view? So you have the secure apps, and you have presumably some sort of system that's not Firebase and that's not Google for notifications, right?
Yes.
And then if I get a notification from Uber, is that compartmentalized as well? Or does it kind of mix in with the stream of, because, otherwise you have to basically manage 2 phones and 1 hardware, and that gets to be a bit cumbersome, right?
It does. So what we've done is, here's another one of the differentiators. Today, we know that anyone can download Graphene OS and others, put them onto a device if they have the proper knowledge, and away you go. What we've done is we have a dedicated team of mobile OS engineers. We only work with OEMs. So so this is a segue.
Want to show the device real quick, since this is a prototype, I presume, right?
It is. This is a development platform. If you can see this particular screen, that's the Domus screen. Now, what's on that screen? You have email, you have contacts, you have calendar. It's those applications that have been taken and extremely vetted by our data privacy and security team. By the way, everything we talk about has to do with free open source software. What's the email client on here? Good question. K9. What's the operating system? Graphene OS. The back end, which is the critical component.
Yes.
Well, from a PIM services point of view, I could use the word PIM, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Personal information management, everyone.
Thank you.
In case you weren't around in 1999.
And so when we talk about that portion of the back end system, that's done on Colab now.
Okay.
Oh, what about the fact that this comes with a built-in VPN service out of the box going directly through our Swiss servers? Yes, that's WireGuard. So you can see we're all about the free open source software
So
community.
you have essentially an ecosystem of partners that you've included. So because I know we're going to run out of time, can we switch to talk about the business model? How do
Okay.
you see this working? And you said the OEMs, obviously, so that's a big part.
It is. So let's look at who's been successful. Company called Google's been pretty successful working with OEMs, right?
Right.
And so I was a co-founder of KaiOS as well. And one of the key elements.
I love KaiOS.
Yeah, thank you.
It was really cool.
Thank you. We'll talk
Didn't get
about
the
that
love
later.
it deserved.
We'll talk about that
I'll have
later.
you on again for that.
So one of the elements that we kicked off then, and where Google's been successful, has been with working directly with OEMs, because you need to really get this onto the devices and make sure you get paid in an appropriate way, right?
Yeah.
So they work with OEMs, but they market directly to the consumer. So we're doing the same thing here. We're working with OEMs. We're ensuring that the OS works on their devices, going through proper and appropriate field testing through, again, some of us who are a bit older in the industry and have done this before.
Remember, you're 25. We already covered this.
Good point. That's a very good point. And so from the business model point of view, the only thing we ask in exchange for the data privacy, there is no advertising. You do get everything that we just talked about. We're simply asking for a monthly subscription of about the cost of Netflix.
So basically that covers all the back end stuff, all
Everything.
the services that you
Yes.
provide. And so, my gut feeling, and I'm throwing this out there, is a good partner for this would be Lenovo Moto.
Absolutely.
And I hope you get them on, because, a lot of people buy ThinkPads that are in the security and privacy community
Yeah.
and need something really secure, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there's a ThinkPad phone now, which is
Yes.
kind of cool. So
So what's really cool about this is also at the point of sale. How do we get people to not have to put a credit card in at the same time? We're talking about data privacy. So here's what we've done. Working with the OEMs, we put an agreement in place that says when you sell this product at your point of sale, whether it's on the web or through a channel, included in the price of the phone is the price of the subscription. So don't worry about it until the full year is over.
you get a free year.
You get a free year.
And that's actually a pretty good business model, especially if it costs as much as Netflix. If you care about privacy and security, what is it, $20 a month or less is going to be like insignificant to your business, right?
So that's the business model. We do have one OEM that will be launching in the next 30 to 60 days. So again, it's taken us a couple of years to do this, replacing what Google has done. So I'm going to go very fast with some technology. Replacing what Google has done in the area of things that people might consider to be trivial, such as 204 gateway pinging, the VPN service,
Right.
the DNS service.
Oh yeah, the DNS. Oh my God.
The ability for that device to, what we call, testify to the servers so that we know that you are legitimate and you came out of one of the factories, AKA the old school BlackBerry secure methodologies of
right.
the old days, right? So all of these technologies that will never be talked about are all part of this implementation
Wow.
that's about to come out.
Sounds like you have a winner. You've thought of everything.
Almost.
Before we wrap up real quick, my last thing I was going to ask you is, speaking of this, right? Like, does the hardware have to be customized for this to happen? Can I take a phone that I love today and install this OS and pay your subscription and still maybe benefit from, like, say it's a Pixel, the Google camera experience, knowing that Google's going to take that data, but I'm willing to make that compromise, say?
So the answer is no and yes. No first, because everything has to come through our teams, through an agreement with the OEM, because there's a lot of specialized work that still has to go on. So the distribution model really is through the OEM. However, having said that, you could take any existing product today, and we've done this 3 times now. And when you walk into a store, you can buy a Google-based phone, or you could buy an apostrophe-based phone on identical hardware. The difference is the cult that you're signing up for.
Yeah, no, that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of why I thought Moto Lenovo came to my mind immediately.
But having said that, now the yes part of the equation is apostrophe services are fully available and online and can be used with any Apple device, any
Okay.
PC,
So
any
you
phone.
have another thing. So
It's
in
always
the
going to
same
be
way as
there.
iPhone users install all the Google apps, everybody knows
Right.
that. Nobody wants to admit it, right? But you could do the same with your apps, which is
Right.
great. Awesome.
Exactly.
This is a great way to wrap up.
Very good.
Steve, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having
This was
us.
actually super interesting. I think my audience is going to love it. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you very
And
much.
hopefully you'll have you on again at some point.
Thanks, Marion.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, and now that we know everything about apostrophe, folks, I have Rich DeMuro on to talk about the news and everything else that we have to talk about this week. Hi, Rich. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Lots of news. We got Apple stuff. We got Amazon stuff. It's been this. I call it the slide into the holidays. There's just so much
we're
tech
really getting
stuff.
in there, right? Like Apple's done, kind of in process. We've got Google coming up. We've got some OnePlus stuff coming up. We've got Amazon today, Microsoft tomorrow. So a quick heads up to the listeners. We don't know anything about Microsoft because we're recording on a Wednesday this week. You know, I publish on Sundays so that you guys have a regular flow. But that means we have to talk about Microsoft next week. We can speculate. Do you want to speculate right now? What do you think is going to happen at Microsoft?
I mean, look, obviously, new Surface laptop, new Surface computers, maybe a new Surface Studio. Are they going to do the Duo again? That's my question. Is that thing dead or what?
Well, considering Panos just left. That was weird, right? That's another thing. I don't want to talk inside baseball, but like I would have thought that even if he went to Amazon, he would have told them after the event. Like he would have said, "Hey, by the way, now that we've had a nice, successful little Surface event, I'm out of here."
Yeah, or at least don't announce it to the public till after the event. I mean, you could have these things in flux for a long time. Obviously, these are big jobs. He's moving from one big job to another big job. But this guy's the inventor of the Surface. I mean, it's like, come on, you got to have some respect for the company that really made your name. And it's kind of odd that he's leaving before this event. So that means he won't be on stage at the event.
Yeah. So do you think this was like, if you were like to give people in the PR team some advice, this was a bit weird, right? Like, because it's opened up like this big void of uncertainty for tomorrow's event, right?
Yeah, I mean, he is, for all intents and purposes, the face of Surface. He has been kind of the person that's been the lead of this whole thing. He's been an evangelist for the brand and for the products, and he's been quite good at it. And, I just feel like it's a weird ending. And especially the rumors that he's going to Amazon to head up their department. But Amazon had a weird ending. Oh, he's confirmed it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was going to say. He didn't show up today in the thing, did he?
No, he did not show up today. But, Dave Limp was on stage. Limp is a lame duck because he's leaving. So
he's limp, Sorry.
There's just some weird stuff going on because here's the guy, he's the big head of all these Amazon stuff. He invented Echo. He invented, Alexa, I believe. So he left on weird terms. And now they're bringing in a guy who left his company on weird terms. It's just weird all around.
How could they not have ended this nicely? Like, right. Amazon event, next day, Microsoft event. Amazon event has Dave, next day, Panos. And then next week, big announcement. Like, why couldn't we do that? I feel cheated as a journalist, Rich.
Yeah, it also takes away from the event because you want the focus to be on the products. But today's focus, I mean, Dave said a little bit on stage at Amazon about how this is his last sort of performance with Amazon and his last, event. And it's been a great run. Panos will not get the same distinction on stage with Microsoft because he left on such odd terms. But at the same time, look, I mean, it's all business. It's all at the end of the day, money. And, these people they're big personalities and they do what they want to do. I know. It's just kind of interesting to me. Like you don't generally see something this kind of like off, especially with companies that have a lot of experience, Frank Shaw is an awesome dude. Like his team's got to know what they're doing. This seems odd to me because he would have managed this better, I'm sure. So something clearly happened here. I think it'll be interesting to read memoirs in 10 years or something, Yeah, I think it'll be quicker than that. We'll hear something more. But yeah, it is. The story is there. Rich. Okay. On that note, let's talk about Amazon. So you said there's a bunch of products. I think, unfortunately, was at Disrupt this morning recording with Apostrophe, our sponsor. Thank you. And I just have no idea. So where do we start? Okay, let's start with the. Let's see here. I wrote a whole story about this today, so you think I'd know all about it? I mean, obviously, they came out with, they came out on the stage saying, "Look, we are really leaning heavily into AI. We are trying to continue the dream we had with Alexa." But with generative AI. So they're giving Alexa a new voice. They showed her voice back in 2014. She's getting a new voice in 2024. And it's funny because we've been covering this stuff for so long. We just take for granted kind of like the latest iteration of this stuff. But when they played the voice from 2014, you're like, oh, wow, we dealt with that, because it was pretty choppy and it wasn't very, the intonations were not very good. And then, of course, the one that they're coming out with in 2024 sounds really good. And,
Nice.
so they showed that. And then they showed obviously how you're going to be able to interact with Alexa in a more generative manner. But here's the thing about that. I mean, everything they were showing was kind of like, I think it's
Kinda
easier
cringe?
just to, it's like easier to Google that or easier to do that on my phone. Like, he gave the example of, hey, what time does my team play on Saturday night? And, Alexa made, that she said what time they play. And he's like, okay, what are some good sides to serve at that party? I mean, come on, if you don't know what to serve at a football party, like, come on, chips, dip, whatever, hot dogs.
Right?
And
I mean, that's a bad example.
you don't need an Echo device for that. And you certainly don't need generative AI. Now, if you said, hey, I've got mustard, peppers, and onions in my fridge, what can I serve making that? Like, sure, generative AI may come up with a recipe that uses those odd ingredients, but it was like very basic stuff. And then he's like, oh, can you draft an email? And this is where it got sort of generative. Can you draft an email to my friends, inviting them over on Saturday? Alexa drafted the email. He said, can you send that to my phone? Presumably to the, Alexa app. And then you copy and paste and put that in your email. I don't think it was the best use case scenario. Anyway, so that was kind of like, Alexa. The thing they showed that was really cool with Fire TV is that number one, on the newest best Fire TV stick, which is like the Max Plus something 4K.
Max Plus. Love that.
It turns any TV now into a frame, kind of like the Samsung frame.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So remember that feature was only on like the top of the line Omni TVs that Amazon introduced. So now that's going to be on any TV with just this little Fire TV stick. I thought that was really cool. And you can, of course, have your own pictures there. But they also showed something that was cool with generative AI, where you can say you're looking at a picture and you just say, hey, Alexa, can you change this picture to look more like a watercolor picture?
Oh.
And it immediately on screen just affected it. Then he did a cyberpunk picture. I mean, so that was really cool. I don't know how many people are going to use it, but that's, you turn your pictures into artwork.
I think that's cool. I mean, again, like the use case, I don't like, people are simple, right? Like that seems like you'd have to like really be intentional here, right?
Yes.
So I'm not saying it's wrong. I mean, it's a good use of generative AI for sure, but like, it's like, it's good to show off, but will people actually use it? Maybe they will. Maybe because now they can leave their TV on and make it look like art, they'll do it, right? Who knows?
Yeah, and it's just kind of a fun use case. He also showed off, the person during this part of the demo showed off how you can ask for movie recommendations in a very natural way, almost the way you might have interacted at Blockbuster back in the day. Hey, I really like this movie that I watched the other day. What are some movies like it? And I'm also into video games. And then he did another example where he said, hey, let me get the exact quote because it was kind of cool. He said, search for that comedy by, the guy who played the lawyer in Breaking Bad. And Alexa said, I think you mean Lucky Hank starring Bob Odenkirk. And so that was kind of cool. But, they have the IMDb database behind them. So that was kind of neat as well.
Cool. Well, so in terms of hardware, what did they come out with? There was... it looks like they have some new Echo devices and Echo frames. Is that new, or did I completely miss that they were a first gen product?
I think they're on their third gen now with the Echo
third.
So
wow.
If you haven't tried them,
it's an audio thing, right?
Yeah, they're actually really like.
There's no video, right? There's no like AR.
No video.
Okay.
So so the Echo Show 8.
Expensive though.
Well, they are expensive, I think, but I think, because they're slimmer. The last time I tried them, I think they were $250.
Okay, well,
and they were pretty thick frames. I was very impressed. I thought they actually worked really well. What they added this time is that they're much thinner, so they're about 15% slimmer, which I think goes a long way. The audio is better, both hearing the audio and the audio commands. So when you talk to it, it kind of understands things better. And it also has multi-point audio, which I think is the killer feature. And I'm sure you've played with this on some of the headphones that you've tested, but multi-point, if you've never had it on headphones, is really, really handy. Like the Sonys that came out, the little tiny earbuds, just the fact that you can switch between things without really thinking about it is really, really cool.
I mean, that's what Apple nailed with the AirPods, the whole lineup in general, right? Like, let's be real. Okay, and then we've got some Echo Hub, Echo Show.
So
What's the difference between Hub and Show?
So the Echo Show 8 is basically just your standard. It's an Echo Show. It's an Echo Show is just a device with the screen. Is there a lot new? I don't know. Are people these aren't the products that people kind of rush out to upgrade with. It's just when you need a new Echo, you go on the website.
Yeah,
and like,
this
one's
almost
100.
freebies, right? There should be almost like, you get one when you buy like 2 tons of salad at Whole Food or something, like
if you're paying Whole Foods prices, yes, absolutely. You should get a free Echo for sure.
I mean, it's Amazon, right? Both of them anyway.
These are all conduits to Amazon products, right? I mean, the Echo Show is, it's showing all kinds of stuff all the time. The neat thing is that you can set it to show more pictures and stuff like that. They're kind of taking on digital frames as well, because there's now a mode where I think I missed this part a little bit, but I think there's a mode where you can pay a little bit more and it becomes a digital frame and you can share pictures with friends on it and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of neat. The wall mountable Echo Hub is what you were referring to. This is kind of remember those like Crestron systems, like the really expensive things, like the home automation systems?
Yeah.
This is basically that, but it runs
Why can't
Alexa.
you do that with Echo Show though? Like, I don't get it.
You can, but this is mounted to your wall. So this is kind of an iPad style device. What was the device they had? They had like the Echo Show, I think it was like the 15 or something. It was like a big frame looking device.
Right.
And I don't know if that one was wall mountable, but this one certainly is. It's meant to be mounted on a wall. It's kind of cool. It's a good alternative if you've ever tried to like put an iPad on the wall or something like that. So
yeah, I mean, there's a good illustration here of it mounted on the wall, and it looks pretty nice.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the software with that. Like is the stuff that you want to control in this ecosystem? Obviously, a lot of stuff is in the Alexa ecosystem, so I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just you kind of have to be all in if you're going to put that on your wall.
Yeah.
Let's see.
The soundbar, is that new? Have they done a soundbar before?
I don't remember them ever doing a soundbar. They've done speakers, and I think that they're going to sell a lot of those soundbars. Amazon. Oh, I know. Okay. So this event specifically, you're talking how many products? They literally throw up products, and all the Blink stuff, all the Ring stuff, the Eero. I mean, there's so many products that they came out with. It's just kind of overkill. And so, and not a lot of it's available instantly. A lot of it is within the next, couple of months availability.
They've been doing this for a while though, where they like every year at this time they have an event. I remember going when I was at Engadget a decade ago. I remember going to the one that was at Santa Monica Airport. Remember that one?
Yes, I was there. Right. We were there together. We didn't know each other back then.
We didn't know each other back then. But the point is, I went to that one with Brian Heater, who's not at TechCrunch, who was at Engadget with me, and the two of us covered it. And I remember like we were running around with our heads cut off. There were so many devices to do hands-on with. We were like, oh my God, we're gonna die.
That was Jeff Bezos was on stage. Remember, he held up the Paperlight or the Paperwhite?
I know. I mean, it's even then they had a plethora of hardware devices to announce, and it hasn't let off. Like every year since then, it's been like that in the fall. And you're right, some of them are announced and not available immediately. So it's kind of hard to keep track. But look, I use both the Amazon ecosystem and I use, of course, Google a lot. I use Siri sometimes because I do have some Apple devices, obviously. But here's the thing. For me, what really is interesting here is that, these are cool products. Like if you look at the glasses, I think the soundbar could be really helpful to a lot of people. Soundbars are kind of like a jungle. If you have to do a lot of research like to buy a good soundbar, and maybe this is good enough and it's like trusted, right? It's like it's Amazon, it's Echo, right? But here's my point. Like at the same time, it is Amazon, it's Echo. Like who really uses that ecosystem? Like I understand that a lot of us have it because for me, it's because there's a lot of my home automation, like my Ring camera. I've got basically a bunch of devices that are not in the Apple or Google ecosystems, right? That I use with Amazon's ecosystem.
Yeah,
but only because they kind of were there.
Yeah,
and they're the first with a speaker, right? A smart speaker. but I don't have any investment in it. I never order stuff on Amazon through my devices like that. I always go to the app or the website, right? When I order. So I don't understand. Like, are there people out there who use the Amazon ecosystem as their main ecosystem for search and queries? And like, to me, Google is so much superior if I'm asking the assistant for something that I don't ever see myself, using Alexa for that.
I think there's basic use case scenarios. And I think also you have to keep in mind, not everyone is as tech savvy as you or I. And so there are people that are just saying, Alexa, what's the capital of India? Or just these quick little things. I don't think they're getting very in depth with what Alexa can do, because I don't think the assistant can do all that much. And maybe that'll change with the generative stuff, because they did show examples where they said, instead of saying, because in the past you had to say things really with a specific syntax, like change light number 2 in the office
it's so
to
bad.
this.
I'm dealing with that every day. Yeah.
And so they really made a big point of saying, this is not the way it's going to be going forward. You can walk into a room and say, hey, I'm going to watch a football game. Let's make it feel like Seattle Seahawks in here. And it will change the lights, knowing Seattle Seahawks colors to those colors, and it'll maybe
understanding
dim them
what room you're in, knowing what devices are in that room, and then doing all the protocoling with your Hue hub or whatever it is you have, right?
Yeah.
No, I can see that. I can see that. Like, I'm not against it. I'm just saying, like, I have redundancy in every room of a Echo device with a Google Nest device, because I'm on both. If I want to turn off and turn on certain devices, I don't have integration with Google, because they're old legacy things that I don't want to change, because I don't want to climb and my 16-foot ceilings in my old Victorian apartment in San Francisco. I'm not changing the light bulbs. I'm sorry. Like, I don't care until the cloud for that ecosystem dies and I can never use those light bulbs again, and I physically have to go up there to replace them, or they burn out, which is unlikely since they're LED. I'm not changing. So I'm, basically it's kind of like I'm grandfathered in, and it's terrible.
No, I think you bring up a very interesting point of when you set one of these devices up, and again, we're a little bit different because we're getting stuff into test. We're always trying something new. Yeah. But the average person, they research, they go on Amazon, they buy a light bulb, a smart light bulb, and they're not like swapping that out ever. Like, that is a light bulb that will last until they need to do something with that light bulb. Kind of like what you're saying with the crawling up to the ceilings that are 16 feet high. Like, nobody wants to actively change something once it works. So like for myself, I've got Hue stuff that Hue was pretty much the first smart light that I ever got. And I started building into that ecosystem, even though it was super expensive. And now there's all these cheaper alternatives, but I'm like, well, the Hue kind of works. I've got the hub, I've got the bridge, whatever they call it. And it's consistent. And so yeah, when I go to buy a light bulb, I end up buying one that's, $50 versus 12 on Amazon because of that. So I think that there's a lot going on with this smart home stuff. And I think Amazon probably does derive a lot of value out of the Works with Alexa sticker and all that stuff. And, this Matter situation, all these things working together, hopefully will be good at some point. Right now, I don't think people even understand what that is. Do you want me to go over some other features, like software features that they mentioned?
Yeah, by all means, go for it. We have time.
So this other feature they announced is called Emergency Assist. So the Echo speakers are famous for, people want help from those speakers if there's like an emergency, but they don't really dial 911, and they've been very clear about that. Now you can pay $6 a month, and it's kind of like what Apple's doing, leaning into like this emergency world. Now, if you fall or, get hurt, you can just yell out to your Echo speaker, I need help. It will connect you to a first responder.
Wow.
What do you call it? Not the first. It's like the people in between. Like a help
like
desk,
a call
basically.
Center, but like an emergency call center. Yeah,
exactly. And so and they made a mention of these people have all of your information on file: your address, your allergies, your health history, whatever you want them to have. You can tell them that information so that they can relay all of that, and you don't have to say, "Oh, and by the way, I just ate a peanut and I'm allergic." Like they'll already know that, and so that could be helpful. But again, $60 a year, $6 a month. And they'll sell a lot of those for especially, kids buying them for their parents too, their aging parents.
Yeah, I think they should roll this all into one master subscription. Like includes Ring, includes everything, includes Wise
100%.
if that's what you have. Like, I don't understand why they still haven't really, like, they've gobbled up all these smart home systems, but they haven't really fully integrated them. It's just weird to me. Like, and they have that, what is it called? That sidewalk network or whatever they have.
Yeah.
And some devices don't use that. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, they're very all over the place, and I think a lot of it is sort of the makeup of the fact that they've bought all these companies. Like on stage today, they were making such a big deal about Blink, which is now under the Ring brand, but like that's really confusing to people. Why would I buy a Blink camera versus a Ring camera? Like, what's the difference? And I kind of know the difference. Like, Blink has made a name for themselves on cameras that just do kind of clips, and the battery lasts forever. But like, why do they do that? And you're saying, yeah. And again, Eero, I'm paying a monthly or a yearly subscription to Eero for their like secure service. Then I'm paying, they have like $2.99 for an Amazon Kids service. You got $9.99 for a Kindle Unlimited or whatever. Why not just make that giant Amazon, oh, and by the way, I'm paying for Prime.
I was just going to say,
nickel and diming me here.
Can we have Prime Plus?
Yes.
$200 a year. Everything's included. Everything you're ever gonna do, just give it to me.
And just raise the price by 10% every year.
No, don't go there. Don't give them ideas. Panos, if you're listening, please, no.
Does Microsoft have an all-in-one? I mean, do they do that? No. The only person that's really doing it well is Apple with their Apple One, which, I begrudgingly subscribe to because if I piecemeal that stuff together, it's so expensive.
Yeah. Speaking of Apple, should we switch gears and talk about the iPhones? I mean, we did last week, but now you have them. You've reviewed them, and our reviews are out. I will link to some reviews. I don't have mine. They're arriving on Saturday. So here's by the way, I want to update the audience on something. Here's been my strategy, because, you probably didn't hear the podcast this week, but my strategy was this. I want the Canadian Pro Plus because it's got a SIM tray. And since I have an address in Canada and live there, I can get it there. So I ordered to be delivered a Pro Max with the white color because that's kind of my jam. But I just a base model. I don't need super amounts of storage. So that's coming. But I didn't want to be up at 5 a.m. on Pacific time. So I ordered like 12 hours later, and my best delivery for that is November 6th, which is perfectly fine because, it'll get there when it gets there. And then I get my SIM tray and I can do what I want. In the meantime, though, for you, the audience who's listening, for my first impressions, I've ordered US models to be picked up here in San Francisco on, well, not the 22nd because the earliest I could get was 23rd at the Apple Store in Union Square. So I'm going to go there, pick up an iPhone 15 pink and an iPhone 15 Pro Max with the blue one this time because, well, that's all they had. And it's 512 gigs on top of that because that's all they had. So basically, I'm getting some devices, and the lovely folks at Verizon are hooking me up with some eSIMs for a week or so, which is great because I don't plan to keep them. This is literally to be returned to the Apple Store within the 14 days so that I can get a feel for them and give you my thoughts and feedback. But in the meantime, we have Rich right here, and you've got both of those or something like it, right?
Yeah. I've got. I believe. Yeah. This is the Pro Max in blue, titanium blue.
That's what I'm getting. Cool.
So it looks really good. I mean, it reminds me of that Pacific blue color from a couple years ago, except maybe a little bit deeper, maybe. I'm trying to remember what that looked like, or maybe it's lighter. I'm not sure. But anyway, and I have a case on here. I put the Spigen case on here. This is that's like my standard case.
It's nice.
What's it called? The hybrid or something?
I don't know.
Ultra hybrid. It's just like the standard. It's grippy. It protects. It's good. But it's weird. They did a almost a matte finish on the back this year of the case for the Spigen. So it's like not like the Apple case. This is the Apple case. This is the iPhone 15 with the blue color, which
you can't tell. Like every video I've seen looks like white to me.
Yeah, they're really light. So I think that's to do with the color infused or whatever. What do they call it? Color infused back glass. It's like they need to. It's like, remember when you made Easter eggs? You would like put them in the little thing.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like you left them in. If you only left them in for like a minute, they wouldn't be that like colorful. So they need to like, don't be so impatient. You gotta leave these dipped in the dye for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But overall impressions, I mean, look, it's so funny when you talk iPhone, because so much of what happens with iPhone are these tiny little changes that I think for iPhone users, if you're getting a new phone like every 3 years, they really are kind of big changes. But if you're doing it every year like myself and reviewing these things, they're good little tiny changes, but there's nothing like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is so different. Now, I think the USB-C is really nice. Like the more I think about it and the more I kind of go through the day, it's like, okay, you can charge it, you can add this accessory, you don't have to buy different things. I think that's really nice. But on the flip side, a lot of people, I'm getting feedback, they don't want the USB-C.
So I actually want to ask you that because, because you do TV in LA here, you are much more in touch with the average user than I am with my audience who is tech savvy and early adopters. Nobody here is going to argue listening to us that USB-C is the way to go. That's what we've been wanting forever, simply because we have devices from different companies and even Apple's own devices that are all USB-C, and it makes sense. So hooray to that. But I want to get your feeling for what's been your finger on the pulse of the average American, at least in LA, about this. Are they upset? Are they kind of on board? Like, what's the general vibe?
I will say, compared to the switch from 30 pin to Lightning, because I was on TV back then, and I remember that very specifically, it was the end of the world for everyone. Nobody wanted that whatsoever because they didn't see the benefit of it. Now, this time around, I think there's less grumbling for sure. I think there are some people that are definitely saying, I don't want that. I'm going to go for the better prices on the 14. Are they still selling the 14? And to me, I would argue that, yeah, you're going to save a little money on the phone. Let's say you save $100 or $200. I mean, what do they do? Discount these by $200, the old models? I mean, it's not that much.
Like that. Yeah.
But now it's like you're going to be a couple years behind. Yes, you can use your cables for a while, but it just seems to me like if you're going to go through the process of getting a new iPhone, why would you get something that is now going on a couple of years old? Because remember, they start making these things and developing them like a year in advance. So it just seems to me a little bit short-sighted to say I don't want the new technology on the bottom, when I think in the next 3 years that you have this phone as the average consumer, the whole world is going to switch over to USB-C, and Lightning is going to be tougher to find in taxis and hotels.
Aren't you just delaying the inevitable is the question, right?
Yeah.
Like, I get it. It's a pain point right now for some folks, but the cable's in the box. Everything that you plugged your old cable into that came with your last phone, which probably had a Lightning to C, unless it's really old iPhone and had a Lightning to A. But if it's Lightning to C, all you need to do is replace the cable. And, there's these cheap adapters on Amazon that go, from Lightning to USB-C, right? You can buy like a dozen of those for like $10 and plug your old Lightning cables into that, and it'll charge your iPhone and give you basic data functionality. It'll hold you over. Like, I don't see what the big deal is. These are things that you're going to leave permanently plugged into these cables. Like, you're not going to remove them ever. So I don't get it. I think it's a bit weird that people are so... honestly, it's interesting that you think it's been easier, because my vibe from social media, and this is not my audience, but the general survey of social media that I'm getting, the picture I'm seeing, is there's more grumbling. There's more, because I feel like way more people have iPhones. You know what I'm saying? That back.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why. But I think, look.
Well, I think the flip side of it, the confusion that I'm seeing is, what is the benefit of USB-C? And I think that's where people are really tripping up, because they're not really sure why this is happening. And okay, so first off, the main thing about that is you've got data transfer speeds, which, let's be honest, most average people are not using data transfer from the iPhone.
Matter.
Like, unless you're, a creator or whatever. And
then the Pro has the faster speed anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's the number one. Number two, a lot of confusion is, will this charge my phone faster? And if you look at the specs on Apple's website, I don't see any improvement whatsoever in the charging speed, because it's still a 20-watt adapter, and that's basically it. So
I think the advantage, and I think this is what us as journalists have to sell them on, is this is one charger that rolls it all, right? You can buy a like an Anker $15 65 watt like micro PD that looks like the same size as the Apple charger from years ago, right? You can buy that. It's got a USB-C port on it. You use that cable you got in the box from Apple, and that will charge anything you have. Anything. Like your laptop,
that's huge.
Your phone, your Sony earbuds, because maybe you didn't buy the Apple ones. Maybe you have a Nintendo Switch. Maybe you have an iPad Pro. All of these, one charger.
Yeah.
Like, how can that not be a good thing?
Yeah, I think the charger's a good thing. I think the titanium, people are wondering about the titanium on the Pro. And also, I think it's confusing to understand when you look at the iPhone 15. I think that it got really good improvements with the camera because it's now a standard 48 megapixel camera, which is incredible.
I think the
compared to
15 is
before.
the best freaking upgrade on the base iPhone in at least 2 or 3 years. Like, I don't understand why people are pissed off about it. Like, you're getting
100%
USB-C, you're getting a 48 megapixel camera, you're getting the dynamic island,
2x zoom.
you're getting 2-time lossless. You're getting all this cool stuff. Finally, you're getting this last year's good chipset. The only thing that I personally would have liked to see, but it won't happen in Apple universe because they have their definitions, is promotion, right? Because Pro is a Pro thing. So we're not going to get 120 hertz, but I think you know what's going to happen? Eventually, they're gonna want to put ProMotion, the 120 hertz, on the MacBook Air, on the base iPad, on the base iPhones, but they're gonna not call it ProMotion because it's not a Pro thing. So like maybe they'll call it Magic Motion or Motion Air or
Smooth Display or something.
Right?
Now that's a good point because I agree that it's an odd oversight that Apple is not putting that on this phone because it's when you look at the 15 this year, it's pretty much the iPhone 14 Pro minus that
without
lens
the
from
telephoto.
last year.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so the fact that it doesn't have the ProMotion, which is odd because, okay, and I have different thoughts on this. First off, if you are an iPhone 12, 13, whatever user, back to 8. I mean, I have people like telling me that they're upgrading from the 8, the 9, the
Holy
10.
crap. Well, I'm upgrading from the 11 personally, so you can imagine. But I mean,
if you're using that base model and you're not using a Pro model, you don't know that it's really slow between these transitions. Like my wife has the standard iPhone. When I go to her phone, my eyes are like bugging out. Even when I'm using this one, this is a brand new phone and it's got the A15 Bionic in it, and it's kind of like I'm like, oh, is this phone slow? Oh no, it's just these transitions are just different than they are on the Pro model. The Pro model feels super buttery smooth. It's kind of like, and I know you're a nerd when it comes to like Android stuff. So do you do the thing when you get your Android and you go into the developer settings and you immediately change the transition? What is it? The animation, right?
Yeah, the animation speed.
Yes, you change it to like 0.5 because it makes your Android seem a lot snappier. I've been doing that for a decade.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
They need that on iPhone.
There's a few phones I don't do that on. The OnePlus, usually I don't because it's just great.
Yeah.
But definitely on Pixels, I do it because I don't feel like they're doing it quite right. But no, I think that from our perspective, this audience, it's unfathomable that you can buy a $300 Moto G or, OnePlus N30, whatever, Nord, right? The cheap budget phones sold by prepaid carriers with a 90 or 120 hertz display, and you have to spend $800 on a brand new iPhone 15 and you still don't get 120 hertz. I understand that. I want to validate the people who are offended by that because it is unbelievable. But as you said,
and it's quite rude from Apple to do that to them because it's not like you're getting a budget phone. This is a premium device. And on the flip side of that, for $800 in today's day and age, I mean, I know these are more expensive than, whatever, like it's still expensive, but you're getting a really good device for $800.
It's really good in other ways. Yeah. I think the reason here is because they know their audience. A lot of their audience doesn't even know what it looks like. And they can save a bit of money because I believe this is not an LTPO panel. This is an LTPS panel. Even though it looks identical to the 14 Pro panel from last year, it is not the same. So because Apple has such economies of scale. They're able to specify a slightly different display to save a little bit of money. But here's the thing, right? I think the biggest thing for them is that they're not just saving money and they're not just saying, well, they know what it feels like. I think for them, it's a battery life saver. They're trying to optimize the experience in every way, right? It's true that 120 hertz, even on an LTPO panel, is going to waste more battery, right? Like that's a fact. So not maybe much, maybe 2%, 3%, but we've seen that the iPhones have really good battery life in the last few years, right? And that's going to continue. So I think that's another reason. I wouldn't be surprised if you talk to off the record, like privately with somebody who you never reveal their name or anything, that, there's an good potential engineering reason in terms of battery life behind this. Because remember, Apple's phones compared to Android's phones, batteries are smaller. The processors are more efficient, yes, but you can only go so far. With a smaller battery to start with, right? Your display is going to be a bigger part of that budget, right? So I think there might be something there. I don't want to defend Apple because I'm annoyed with this. And as you said, it's kind of rude, right?
Yeah. And I think that we've seen in probably the last, let's say, from day one of iPhone announcements, there's always been a part of the announcement where they mentioned the improvement to the battery life. You can stream, and it's always, I think the first time we saw this was when they did it. I think it was it was like the, when did they start calling it the Bionic? The A15 Bionic? 13, but whatever it was, where it got like a really big increase. Anyway, the battery life went up for a bunch of years, and now they don't make that big of a deal out of it because the battery life hasn't really changed on the Apple Watches, except for the Ultra, obviously, when that came out. And it really hasn't changed on the phones as much. I think they squeezed like 1 extra hour out a couple of years ago, but we don't really hear about that. So I think that theory could be correct, that if you got this new phone, this new base model iPhone to replace your 3-year-old model, and the battery was worse, you would say that's a worse phone, and that would be a real problem. So until they can figure out how to keep this phone kind of small, inexpensive, small battery, all these other things built into it, and then keep that battery at the same time or a better life with that Pro, that's when they'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is potentially somebody who's done this out there already. If somebody did the tests, right, of all the battery life on all four, we might actually see the 15 Plus really win. Because, a bigger battery and the display being, 60 hertz, I don't know. I think Apple thinks differently sometimes to a detriment because they're so invested in their kind of view of the world, right? And I think that bothers me sometimes because, I'm not a huge iPhone and wearable and, iPad user, but I'm a big Mac fan. I'm a big Mac user. I love my Macs. And, for a while there, we were really suffering, as as Mac users, with kind of the Intel things really even the Core i9 on the Pros were kind of like leaving a lot to be desired and thermal management, etc. And then the M came out, and the M has just been just a game changer. And now we really cannot go wrong. And so I want to say, Apple sometimes does it right, but sometimes I feel like they're a little too, I want to say tone deaf almost to what's going on in the rest of the industry. And yes, they can afford to do that because they're so big and strong. But at the same time, competition is healthy. Keeping track of what the rest of the world is doing is healthy. It makes your products better.
Well, make no mistake, they keep track of what the rest of the world is doing, but they are so big. It's like the sun. Because the sun is so big, the planets, rotate around it. That's Apple. They get to call the shots. And yeah, they've got all these little people kind of saying things on Instagram and Twitter and social media and writing articles. But does any of that really matter? Because at the end of the day, it's still Apple. And here's when you realize Apple is listening. When they change the phone with the next model, let's say the whole year, we'll sit there and talk about the ProRes on the iPhone 15.
Right.
And they won't say a word. They're not going to respond. They're not going to entertain our issues with it. But then next year, they will announce the fact that it's, the new screen, it's got a higher refresh rate, and it will be their way. And that's how they do it. And they've been doing that forever. And so yes, and this is why Apple is some people love it, some people hate them. They're so big that no matter what they do, a tiny movement by Apple is magnified a million times.
Yeah. But I think that's why we've been telling them for 2-3 years now they need 120 hertz on everything. Right? Like it's not a new
We've also
thing.
been saying they need USB-C for a long time.
Yeah, well, MFI was a big, cash cow for them,
Oh,
and I get it, but I don't agree with it. It's not ethically, I think it's the wrong decision. Like, Lightning was technically superior when it was announced to anything else. Then USB-C came along and it was actually initially technically inferior in terms of charging speed, data speeds even. Like it just got better and better and better and better. And why did it get so much better? Because, well, first of all, Apple contributed to that by making their MacBooks USB-C with the 12-inch MacBook, right? And then the iPads, but also because of the competition, everyone else adopted it and they were able to push the envelope on it, right? It wasn't Apple who pushed the envelope on USB Type-C. It was, a lot of it was Intel with Thunderbolt. A lot of it was, the Android phone makers, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like sometimes they pigeonhole themselves, for money, but I think they're not really looking at what the competition is doing. They're a little stuck in their ways. And I'm so glad it took the European Union to say, no, USB-C this is it. Because sometimes you need that. And I think this is a prime example. And, maybe it's because I grew up in Europe and I'm a Canadian as well, that, I don't want the government to interfere at all. But sometimes we get a little too cocky in the tech world. And this is when, sometimes somebody needs to come in and go like, yay, stay in your lane. This is your lane, and maybe this is, this is another area where I think what we should see more kind of, for a while there, we didn't care about software updates, us journalists, too much. And then we realized this is a significant thing for our audience. And we start advocating and it started happening. And Samsung and Google and everyone is kind of doing what Apple's been doing all this time, like supporting phones for 5 years, 4 years, whatever. I think there's another thing coming where we all need to really start pushing the envelope, advocating for audience. And that's high frequency pulse width modulation on the displays, the OLED displays, so that they don't flicker when they're set to lower dimmer settings. There's a lot of people out there, including some of my audience members who've emailed me about this saying, why do you like OLED so much? I can't look at an OLED display without getting a migraine. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And they've educated me. And, Nick Sutrich, who's been on the podcast, who's a journalist, he's got this problem. Like he likes a lot of the Chinese Android phones because a lot of them support this super high frequency PWM refresh at low brightness level. They don't see the flicker and it doesn't give them a headache. So maybe we need to advocate for audience for that. And that can only be done with a high refresh rate display, right? So
it's
that
also
automatically gives you 120 hertz.
It's also knowing about that. Like I didn't know about the Nick situation until I think he was telling me in Korea about that. And I was like, wait, what? Like this is like or was he telling me? No. Either he was on a podcast or on my radio show, whatever it was. He explained this, and it was the first time I ever heard of it. And I said, wait, what? Yeah. And so he explained the whole issue. And so I think that's also part of it. It's like educating people about the advantages of different technology and different ways of doing things. So that's another one. I mean, I think like you said with the USB-C, it kind of goes back to that. It's like when people understand why it's better, it's like, oh, you can go into a store and ask for a charger, and also when companies make chargers, they don't have to make 2 different versions of them, like a, portable battery or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if you have one, you can lend it to a friend and you can, it's kind of like the same thing that's happening, this movement with the Qi wireless, charging. It's like we've gotten to a good standard there. And it started out MagSafe on the iPhone, was a great revolutionary idea. And now that idea is going to make it to Android and it's all going to work the same way. So when you buy a charger, your phone will magnetically attach to that if it's an iPhone or an Android. And so all these things are movements in the right direction. But at the heart of all of these decisions is money. And you know that. You mentioned it with the display. And so companies, given their own free will, are just going to do what's kind of best for them and their customers. but
Yeah.
it still takes a little bit sometimes.
So let's talk quickly before we wrap up and get into some news about the telephoto on the 15 Pro Max, because unlike the previous Pro devices and the current 15 Pro, it doesn't have the 3x telephoto. It has this crazy tetraprism 5x, which is a folded lens but not a periscope because there's not a right angle. And it is kind of an amazing feat of engineering, I think, because it managed to be a very compact depth, and the quality speaks for itself, right? I've seen some samples. They look really good. What's your take? You're a Pixel person like me. You use the 5X on the Pixel 7 Pro and Pixel Fold, right? To me, that's kind of like the reference as to, there's others, right? Like there's the 10X on Samsung, and some Chinese phones are really great too. But
Yeah.
do you think it lives up to Google's Pixel goodness?
I think I need some more testing, more hands-on time with it before I call that, because I think that Google in general just adds a certain kind of look to pictures. I think the pictures from the iPhone, it's just, I think iPhone pictures look a very specific way, and I think Pixel pictures look a very certain way, and I think that Samsung is kind of somewhere in the middle between those. When it comes to 5X, I think that, quite honestly, 99% of people do not need 5X. I'm not even sure I need 5X. Most of the time when I'm taking a picture, it may come in handy. With video, it's like 5X is probably just too zoomed in to do anything, of quality. But I think if you're taking pictures of, if you're a photographer, you like that added range, no matter what. I think the 10X on Samsung, like that's one of my favorite features, is having, like, it just feels like you're really equipped to like handle anything when you're talking about a 10X lens, right? And when it snaps into that 10X, you just know it's like, okay, this is clear. But sometimes when you compare the pictures against, if you're really steady and you're just zooming in digitally, it's like kind of sometimes looks the same. So I think that the 5X is nice. It just sounds silly when it's such a big deal. It's been on other phones, and specifically,
that's such an Apple
Samsung's
thing.
had
You
10X.
know that. I mean, us listeners here too, we all know that. But I do think that, I love to do street photography, and it's a lot easier to do when you're not in people's faces, and having a good telephoto for that really helps. And it opens up a whole bunch of use cases, I think. You're taking a picture of a sign across the street because you have bad eyes and you can't read, whatever. Like 3X will do it, but now with 5X, you got a range of 5X to 20X or something that's usable instead of 3X to 10X, right? So I think there are some benefits, and I'm glad that Apple's exploring that. And I think that combined with a bunch of the other things that they introduced here, new image processing pipeline that they have and stuff, I think we're going to see some differences. I'm looking forward to getting these phones because I have played with the 12 series, the 13, the 14, because I only own an 11, but I have not really dug in a while on iPhone. And I've decided that this is the year to upgrade, and I'm going with a Pro this time because I want to do more than just video. That's why I bought an 11 originally, because I was just doing video of product stuff, and I didn't really need a telephoto or anything. But now I want to do some photography this year. So I'm getting a Pro Max for myself to keep. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. I am, and again, I think this goes back to Apple, and I know every manufacturer does this, but the fact that they again split these, the Pro models, they split them again. I don't like that, because I like the fact that in previous years you could pick the Pro or the Pro Max, and it was the same identical specs. That was really refreshing to me, and the fact that now they've made you choose if you want the 5X, which of course, if you're into photography or you're into the best that Apple can offer, then of course you want the 5X, because that's the newest and latest and greatest. The 3X now seems like, okay, well, I've had that for a couple years now.
Yeah, right.
So, and then of course they get you for the extra $100, because even though the prices didn't go
more
up,
storage. You do get more storage.
You get more storage, but the price didn't go up. But you weren't going to buy that anyway. But here, you're still spending extra $100. But overall, I would say that I think that this is one of the best upgrades, even though it's small upgrades. I think this is probably the best upgrade I've seen overall on an iPhone in a couple of years, ever since maybe 5G. And I think ever since they started with the, whatever they call it, photonic engine, when they started really kind of like up in the game with their pictures, I think that this is kind of like the next step.
Since we just talked about the Pixel Fold, I want to just give Pitaka, not a sponsor, a quick bit of love For those of you watching on Patreon, I'm holding up my Pixel Fold right now with the Pitaka case on it, and it's so freaking hot. So thin, too. Like, I just love it. And if you're looking for a really nice case for your Fold, but you want something thin that doesn't make it look bulkier, and this has MagSafe. So it has a support with the magnets to work with MagSafe compatible gadgets. I want to thank Pitaka for sending me those. Also, I wanted to quickly, while we're thanking people here for the week, thank TechCrunch Disrupt for letting us use their space this morning for recording the apostrophe segment that you've watched or listened to earlier. That was provided by the folks at Disrupt who set up a little studio space. That's why we had separate microphones and all that. You'll see it's cool. But we have a bunch of news to continue with. The last thing I want to talk about on the iPhones, because I think it's kind of cool, is repairability. So it turns out that and Apple mentioned this in the keynote a little bit, I think. There was some talk about this, of the way it comes apart makes it more repairable, especially the back panel. Like, it's always been relatively easy to replace the displays on the iPhones, but last year's 14 was more repairable because the back panel could be separated, without getting the entire phone disassembled, like all the layers, like display first and then all the layers behind it to get to the rear. Now you can kind of do the rear separately from the front. And I think that's also applying to the 15 Pro and Pro Max, and probably the 15 as well. But I think it's cool. This is important, right? I feel like, if you're going to keep a phone for 4 years, like I did with my iPhone 11, right? Then maybe you want to be able to repair it relatively easily. And if you can't, then of course you're going to upgrade. But is that good for everyone? Maybe for Apple, but it's not good for you. It's not good for the environment. It's just a pain, right? So good news, right?
I think it's really good news. I think that Apple, they leaned heavily in this keynote into their green charge and their repairability. I mean, they didn't specifically. I mean, maybe they mentioned the repairability with the back glass and things like that. But I do think it's a very big deal. Now Apple, they have this interesting thing running where they're trying to sell Apple Care, and they're also, if these prices come down to repair things, it's kind of tricky because, do you need the Apple Care if you can repair these things quite easily? I remember taking an Apple Watch into getting repaired because my kid, cracked the screen, and it was like $299 to repair the Apple Watch. And I said, no, we'll just buy a new one. Now, that's not good on a lot of levels because this watch was just fine except for a cracked screen. So in a perfect world, you would just replace the screen, and now you've kept one device out of the trash or recycling or whatever. So I think it's a really good thing. I also, I just like the idea that you can replace parts better. Like, I remember back in the day with the iPod, like ordering a little kit. Remember when people were like upgrading the batteries in their iPods?
I remember that. Yeah, that was so cool. Yeah.
It was just a fun thing to do. So like, if the iPhone can get to that level where you can like literally pop off the back and pop on the new one, that'd be kind of cool. But I'll take the repairability where it's just easier because people feel more like confident in, probably using these things more or, whatever. And also, not that they don't use their phones enough, but you know what I mean? Like, you'll just feel like, okay, I can, if it costs me $200 to repair this, maybe I'll spend a little bit more on the phone. Maybe I'll get the nicer model. Maybe, whatever. I mean, it's just kind of implications of this.
100%. Yeah, no, this is good news. Speaking of good news, but maybe not good news, I don't know. This one's a tough one. We just talked about telephotos and how we love the S23 Ultra and 22 Ultra and 21 Ultra for their choices of telephotos. There's like the main sensor, ultra wide, of course, and then there's a 3x and a 10x zoom, right? A telephoto. 10x is a folded lens, specifically a periscope. And we love that. I think that's one of the reasons I use my S23 Ultra for all my car photography is because I got that range of zoom. I can stand far away from the car, like, because I'm in nature and I don't really have, I can't, it doesn't work out doing it close by, but if I pull back further, I can get the right shot. But then I need a telephoto, bang, S23 Ultra, it's got me covered. In that sense, I'm happy with the new iPhone for the 5X. And that's also why I love my Pixel. But there are now rumors, and this is early because, it's another 6 months or so here, but that the S24 Ultra is going to drop the 10X and go for a 5X instead. That will have a large sensor, like a 50 megapixel. So they might be able to do some kind of clever lossless 10X, by cropping the sensor. How do you feel about that?
Let's
Is
put
that
it this way.
good or bad?
I think that it would be nice to see Samsung continue. I feel like, I'll be honest, Samsung's all over the place. Their phones every year, it's like you never know what you're going to get. Something's going to change. They introduce one feature and then they drop it the next year. They improve this. Whereas the slow evolution of Apple, I think people just appreciate that because it's like, okay. And I think even with Google, with Pixel, yeah, the design has changed so much, which I do fault them for. Like they keep changing the design, but they kind of have settled in on like, okay, we're making this better a little bit every year. We're kind of keeping the same design language. And I think people just like that, With that said, if they can make a 5 times and, it's kind of like, the 10x thing and the 100x thing did not really catch on. Like nobody else is really doing that. So maybe it's just like, okay, fine. We'll just go back to 5x. We'll make this really good and we can crop in maybe. And like you said, it'll be a 10x thing. But I think better quality for photos and especially with low light and stuff with Samsung, I think, and also that shutter situation, less shutter lag, I think will be better. So the more they can do to up their game with their phones and the photography, I think, that'll be a good thing for them.
No, I agree. I just, I don't want to count them out yet because if you make the sensor bigger in terms of pixel count and you use some computational tricks, look at what the Pixel can do, the 7 Pro and the Pixel Fold can do at 20x, right? They have a 5x and they still do pretty good results up to 20x. So, and 10x is certainly great. So I think, you also have to keep in mind that those S21, 22, 23 Ultras we've had, their 3X and 10X are only 10 megapixel. Now they use sensor fusion, but it's still not, in low light, it doesn't really hold up, right? So imagine a sensor that could handle low light a little better. There might be more flexibility. So I'm not saying this is good or bad yet because we'll have to figure it out, but it's always hard when you do something like this because, people don't think about the implications and then they get upset. It's like the USB-C versus Lightning. All the upset people that they're losing Lightning are not looking at it long term, Well,
and also it's been a nice party trick with the 100X and it's been a differentiator. And I feel like if Samsung steps away from that, it feels like a step back for the Samsung users. And, they may feel a little bit slighted, like, wait, I had this and now I don't anymore. Like that's kind of weird and I'm getting an upgrade. So I think that it's definitely they're in a tough position if they do. But I think, like you said, if they can improve the overall quality of the photos and the low light and they really push into that, I think that's really where they can say, okay, you know what? How many times do you use 100X versus how many times you take a picture at night and you want it now? There's never any blur and people will like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see how it goes. I mean, this is still a few months away. One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up. This has been an ongoing saga for a few weeks now on the show. I don't know if you know this, Rich, but when Huawei launched the Mate XS2 a year ago, it's a Huawei phone. It's unobtainium for us, but, it's from the get-go, Huawei's folding book-style phone was an externally folding, right? Not the display wasn't inside. And then they eventually started making an internally folding one. But their initial design was one where, it wrapped around the outside. And that's now become the Mate XS series, where the Mate X without the S is internally folding like a Z Fold of some kind, or the Pixel Fold, or that upcoming OnePlus Fold, whatever it's called, right? So when they came out with their phone like a year ago, we're like, okay, so it's slightly improved and whatever. And then Honor surprised us with this concept phone at IFA called the Honor V Purse, right? And it was a concept. And last week we found out that they were launching it in China. And this week they confirmed that they're launching it in China. It's official now. And, you can't look at these two phones, Huawei's phone from a year ago, the Mate XS2, and Honor's V Purse and not go, there's a lot of similarities between these two. Now, I'm not going to get into that too much, but my approach has been that it's almost a carbon copy. And yes, it does appear to be that way. But now that we have official specs, I want to kind of go over that because they are actually quite different. I think I think from an engineering point of view, you can tell that, at some point initially when Honor was still a part of Huawei, which is when the original MacBook style external folding phone came out, they clearly had access to that technology, and they didn't do anything with it because they've been internally folding so far on the Honor side. And so then they decided to make this phone. And you look at the specs and you go like, oh yeah, okay, this is different. So here's the biggest spec that really makes it like different. Size-wise, they're pretty much the same, except for thickness. Are you ready for this? 11.1 millimeter folded for the Huawei phone from a year ago. 11.1. 8.6 millimeters folded for the V Purse. That's thinner than the Honor Magic V2, which we thought was the thinnest we'd seen. This is thinner. This is thinner by quite a bit than an iPhone 15 Pro or than a Galaxy S23 even.
Okay, that's pretty wild.
Do you want to know how thin it is unfolded, opened? This is going to blow your mind. 4.3 millimeters.
Yeah, that's quite incredible. But
that's the thickness of a USB Type-C port. So that's why they actually put the USB Type-C port on the edge part. So I am now going, okay. Like, clearly this is not the same phone. But at the same time, clearly the very design inspired, very much the same kind of engineering, which is probably because they inherited some of it when the company split. But like, kudos to them. That's incredible tech, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's nice. I personally don't really want a phone with a screen on the outside just yet. I think that it's like, even having the one screen on the foldables on the outside, those get, they get some wear and tear on them because you're always, although I will say, I use the Pixel Fold, quite steadily for, a couple weeks, and without a screen protector on the front, and I had it in my back pocket, it held up.
Yeah.
So I was quite impressed with that. And I think that's one of my favorite foldables right now. So
I love my Pixel Fold. That's why I finally decided to get a good case for it, because the Google case, do not get the Google case, folks. It's not worth it. Again, I don't have any agreement with Pitaka here, but for $20 more, get the Pitaka or something like it, because thinner, prettier, MagSafe, like, you can't go wrong. I just feel like Google's cases are always a disappointment. Sorry.
Yeah, I've never used them because of that reason. So they always, when I get the review unit, they always send a Google, like, one of their little transparent cases, and I've never ever liked them ever. I don't feel like they're just very grippy. And even when they did the remember when a lot of people liked the fabric cases they had, I always found those to be a little bit just like,
they're too bulky too.
Yeah,
it's the bulk most of the time. They're not durable and they're too bulky. That's the thing that's been bothering me about the Google cases the most. One last couple of things about this V Purse that's interesting. Snapdragon 778 5G. That's mid-range, right? And also 4,500 milliamp hour battery. Yeah, you got it. When it's that thin, you start losing some capacity. Unlike the Magic V2, who has 5,000 milliamp hour battery, despite being 9.9 millimeters thick.
Well, this is really like this is the Samsung Flip of foldable phones, right? I mean, isn't it? It's not this is not for the high end. It may be for the high end consumer, but it's not for the high end. This is China only.
There's absolutely no way we'll ever see this in the West. Like, no way at all. But I just thought it was really interesting because I think a lot of us, I'm not the only one, went into it thinking, hey, this really looks like a copycat of that Huawei Mate design, but it's design-wise kind of very much improved if it is, and so kudos to that. Listen, Rich, we need to wrap up. So do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, where you can be found on social, what your handles are, and of course, give us some idea of where they can find you on television and all that good stuff?
Sure. Okay, so again, name is Rich DeMuro. Rich on Tech on social media. So on mostly on Instagram. Instagram Stories is pretty much where I post a lot of stuff. Facebook, I'm there. Twitter, I'm still there, even though we all know that situation.
I know.
The website is richontech.tv, and then I am on TV. So if you're in the LA area, Channel 5, KTLA, that's where I am. I'm also syndicated. So you may be in a random city like San Francisco or like Chicago, and you might be turning on your TV, or even in Hawaii, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was the guy. So yes, the reports I do are syndicated out to our 100 TV stations, and they run them as they like. So I can't tell you exactly where or when, but that happens.
All right.
And then, of course, I have my radio show, which you've been on, Rich on
Yes.
Tech on the radio. So that's on in a bunch of cities as well. That's nationwide, live on Saturdays from 11 to 2. And of course, it's a podcast as well. So, if you're not in your car, you don't want to listen on, streaming, you could just download the podcast. It's called Rich on Tech. And it's pretty fun. It's, it's very consumer driven. So it is really, it's a call-in show. Let's be honest,
Cool,
I'm
yeah.
on radio and TV. These are people that I call them drive-by folks. They're just watching the news, they're listening to the radio, and then all of a sudden I come on talking about USB-C and the iPhone and this and Samsung, and they're like, wait, what? Okay, that's interesting. New app, So I just kind of have fun with it. And it's for the average person, but of course it appeals to techies too, because we love to hear all tech talk. I do.
Yeah. Look, Rich, I admire you for this. I think it's much harder to have an audience of mainstream listeners and viewers than it is to have a tech savvy, early adopter audience like mine. And I think a lot of us in the media are like really impressed with your work because of it. It's just super awesome. Every time I watch you, I'm like, I can totally relate to what you're talking about. But I'm also knowing that I can show this to my uncle or aunt and they'll totally get it too, which is a super awesome bonus. Folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl, that's TNKGRL. Like the comic book character Tankgirl, just drop the vowels, you get my handle almost on everything. I'm still on Twitter, for better or for worse. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook, on Threads. I'm on Blue Sky, so look me up and add me. And if you want to see pretty pictures of phones and cars and travel and food, check out the Instagram. I'm not big on Reels. I'm mostly a photo person, so check that out. The podcast lives at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on all the major platforms, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, Amazon, everything. So subscribe. And if you want to do the old school way, there's an RSS feed there at that URL. YouTube, course, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. There's some unboxing videos, hands-ons, kind of visual complement to the podcast. You know how YouTube works. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the bell, all that good stuff, comment. And finally, you've heard it mentioned a few times now in the show, like if you want to get an exclusive video version of this podcast that comes out ahead of the public audio version, where you can see me and Rich handling phones and having that, kind of casual personal conversation that you're listening to right now, please look at the Patreon, patreon.com/Tankgirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. We also have a bunch of other perks in there, access to Discord and a bunch of other stuff. So if you can help out, I'd appreciate you looking into Patreon. And if you don't want to use Patreon, just want to do a one-time donation, go in the show notes. There's a link to my website on there. There is a little PayPal button, I believe, that you just like, give me a donation, $5 for coffee. I'll have my coffee. I'm not drinking coffee right now. What's going on? But anyway, I hope you can help out and, check out these options. And I also want to thank our sponsor, Apostrophe. Apostrophe is a mobility platform that gives users the peace of mind of knowing their data is private, secure, and protected by true data sovereignty. With Apostrophe, you can run all your favorite apps without losing control of your personal data. Learn more at www.aphy.io. And I want to thank you, Rich, for being my guest on the show. That was super awesome. Thanks for being on.
And I want to thank you, Miriam, for having me on and also being on my radio show a couple of weeks ago. So thank you. And I admire all of your work as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Listen, we'll have you on again at some point in the future, and I'd love to be on your show again. So hit me up sometime. Folks, we'll have another show next week. You know that. So stay tuned. And until then, cheers, everybody.